So far away, Lucas, welcome to another episode of Wiki Weekends. Are you ready to talk about the sexiest of elves? Wait a minute. Yeah, okay, let's go with that one. I'm trying to remember,
are we talking
who plays
like
that really... Who...
Legolas, Lord of the Rings?
Well, that's the thing, so I was thinking Legolas, but then there's that elf that Lee Pace plays, and I'm like, oh, that's a really fuckable elf as well.
There's many sexy elves.
There is, yeah, but Legolas. Remember how we start these now? Yeah.
Well, you starting by definitively stating that you think Legolas is the sexiest.
Well, he's a very fuckable elf. Let's just put it that way, and that's something we can get into in a bit. Put all the folks at home on the same page. Today we're talking about Legolas from the Lord of the Rings series, and as always, a link to the wiki we're reading from can be found below. But before that, Lucas, what do you know about Legolas of the Mirkwood and the Lord of the Rings series in general?
So my Lord of the Rings knowledge is relatively limited. I'm just one of those people that's watched the films a few times, both theatrical and extended, but I'm not nerding out and watching the extended every week like some people are.
Oh man, one of my favourite, I think, Reddit threads I read. Do you know one of those ones where you read it and it's just like, how are people this clueless? And it was a guy who was like, am I the arsehole? And already you know this is going to be glorious. And it's like, I wanted to watch a movie for my birthday, and it's like, why is that a bad thing? It turns out the movie he wanted to watch was the entirety of the Lord of the Rings extended edition, one after the other, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 12 o'clock at night, and he got really mad at his girlfriend for checking her phone 3 hours in.
Yeah, that's like a 14-hour stint. That's not a movie.
Yeah. But he was like, am I an arsehole? My girlfriend told me she doesn't like fantasy movies, but I said I really want to do. The fact that she got 2.5 hours in before she did that classic thing, and was like, let's go, just go check Twitter, have a scroll.
Honestly, I think if you're trying to get layman into Lord of the Rings,
that's the worst way to do it.
The best way to do it is what I was going to say, is get the extended trilogy and watch them as 6 films.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to do it, because you get a lot in the extended edition, but forcing people to watch 4 hours at a time is really hard.
Yeah, most of the stuff that was cut because it's superfluous things that only weirdo nerds who are obsessed with the franchise will care about. Peter Jackson, he cut that to the bone, and it still ended up 2.5 hours long. I think Return of the King is the longest movie ever. It's got an Academy Award or something like that, because it's I think 240 minutes or something stupid. Before they added another 45 minutes. There's that old joke, isn't there, Return of the King might be the film that ends the most times in a row. Because the joke is the amount of times where you're about to stand up and leave, and then you realise it's oh, and goodbye, and you go to the... It's oh, God damn it.
And it took me a while to learn that they were working on those movies, extended editions, after they'd already been, released and everything.
Yeah, I will say though, for collectors of physical media, those physical editions are one of the best things. The amount of extra content in those extended editions is they are full-length documentaries for the making of every film.
But yeah, it's very strange because apparently they'd already won Oscars while they were still working on those movies, so they were you are doing visual effects for a movie that's already won the Oscar for the visual effects.
It's crazy, isn't it? And I think Lord of the Rings, personally, I like the universe. I like exploring the universe, thinking about the universe. I like all the things that are related to it. I'll use it as their baseline. Stuff Battle for Middle-earth. I love that game. A lot of the other Lord of the Rings games, the RPGs and the action games, were kind of alright. I'm not the biggest fan of the Shadow of Mordor series, but I do like that they're no, fuck it. Who wants to have sex with the spider?
Oh God, no.
Come, Talia. See through my eyes.
She is not our ally.
Oh, never forget, Lucas. One of the women with the most amounts of screen time, in Lord of the Rings is Shelob.
Yeah.
Shelob, I think, is the woman in Lord of the Rings with the second longest amount of screen time, besides Gadriel. Obviously, I'm going to point out as well, for Lord of the Rings fans, I'm going to mispronounce a lot of words.
It's going to
Tolkien made a lot of stuff up, and there was no set pronunciation.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it, that Éowyn, is it, who kills the Witch King? She is in the movie very little if you watch the theatrical cuts.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, this woman? Like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I am no man.
And one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien and his son Christopher, who like posthumously edited and released a lot of stuff, just hated anything that wasn't the books. And like, during the have people saying like, "Oh man, those movies are such good adaptations." You have like quotes from Tolkien's son and his friends who knew Tolkien in real life, like he'd have hated the movies. Mm-hmm. He would have hated them. And it's like, why? They were so close to his source material, like, they actually really weren't. There's a bunch of stuff that he gets wrong that, like, Tolkien would have been a huge, like, you know, stickler for, because, like, details of what he was, like, you know, known for, isn't it? Like, he invented multiple languages for all of his characters and stuff like that. He basically wrote The Lord of the Rings as an excuse to, like, create more languages. The level of minutiae that he went into is that he invented sign language for dwarves that work in the mines because they'd be deaf because of all the metal work they did.
I understand why, you know, they made the changes that they did, and I would argue that it's probably the best version that they could have made, but
yes,
like, I'm sure he'd be upset that Tom Bombadil wasn't in there for half an hour, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like some of the stuff that like Peter Jackson chose to cut is very, very wise because, like, you know, Tolkien's writing style, very florid, very descriptive, like, you know, like immaculate world building, but you, like, you know, it's like this thick. Mm-hmm. You can't. And like, no, the box set is about that thick as well, and that's all 3 movies. But, you know, let's bring it back to, you know, the Legolas of the Mirkwood. And we'll start with a quote from Legolas when he's speaking to Frodo in the Fellowship of the Ring. "Nay, time does not tarry ever, but change and growth is not all things and places alike. For the elves, the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow." And that's like, you know, a nod to the fact that elves can live for like 1,000 years. Like, I think Legolas is like 800 years old at the start of the books.
something ridiculous, yeah. And I presume then we are not talking about the film version where the only line said to him is, "You have my bow."
Yeah, and that's like another thing is like, there's so many like little details that get pointed out about that movie of like, yeah, do you like the fact that Legolas says one line of dialogue to Frodo?
And you have my bow.
And my axe.
Like, Legolas interacts with Frodo once throughout the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, at the end of the entire trilogy, when, like, each hero's coming back to, like, wish Frodo well, he's like, "Oh, Aragorn, oh, Gimli." Legolas walks in, he doesn't say a word, and it's like the theory that, like, he doesn't know what his name is.
It's like that bit in... It's like Batman versus Superman, where it was pointed out to me and I was like, there's no way. There's no way. I don't believe this until I went back and watched the theatrical cut, and it's that Superman and Wonder Woman never say a word to each other. They never interact the entire film. And it's like, what?
Did you find the spear?
I've been a little busy.
This creature, seems to feed on energy.
This thing is from another world. My world.
I've killed things from other worlds before.
And that's the thing, they do. They're in the same scene together, but they never directly interact, and it's really fucking weird. It's like that one of like, "You have my bow," and that's the only line they say to each other.
It is absolutely bizarre that, like, that's it. That's just it. And, like, they're obviously both very big parts of the movies, but they're very big parts of different storylines for the entire trilogy. Yeah. Like,
and that's the thing, Legolas is probably one of my favourite characters in the films, just because I love how dumb it is.
Yeah.
Like, all the little things that you can do as we're about to go. So, we'll go but before that, the basic biographical information for Legolas Greenleaf. Did you know his last name was Greenleaf, Lucas?
I did not, no.
He's Legolas Greenleaf, so his other names include just simply Greenleaf. He is the Prince of the Woodland Realm. He died in a long time because he's an elf, and then the realms that he is from are the Woodland Realm, and this is where like the Tolkien comes in of like the Ethelian.
Yeah. Ethelian, maybe, like that sounds about right. But
either way, and then it's like the one thing I wanted to mention though is that the actor who played him is Orlando Bloom, who also voiced him in all of the games.
Their stench of evil must end here. I sense evil may be near.
Oh.
So do you know a lot of those like Lord of the Rings like tie-in games? Orlando Bloom was contractually obligated to come back, but people like Viggo Mortensen weren't.
Yeah.
So they got Orlando Bloom back in, but they didn't get Viggo Mortensen.
I presume like this was kind of the kickoff of his career around the same time as Pirates, right? So he probably didn't have much foot in at the time.
He's like, yeah, I'll do the voice. How many like Lord of the Rings games are they possibly gonna make? And then just make like 30 of them. Well, just some basic information about Legolas here. Legolas was a Sindar elf who was part of the Fellowship of the Ring in the Third Age. Son of the Elven King Thranduil of the Mirkwood. I'm going to get all these words wrong. I'm just going to say Lee Pace. Legolas was Mirkwood's prince, a messenger, and master archer. Yeah, no shit. I've never seen, like, the shit that Legolas pulls off with that bow is ridiculous.
Yeah, like, you've got shit that he does that even like Hawkeye would be impressed by.
Yeah, like Hawkeye, the originator of the USB shot, and like Legolas, he's just doing like what the Moomer kill, where he kills the Moomer kill with like the triple arrow,
and he defies gravity, sliding up that tail, just going for it.
It's ridiculous, yeah. That's something to do with like his elven physiology we have here. He has with a keen eyesight, sensitive hearing, and excellent bowmanship, Legolas was a valuable addition to the Fellowship in their journey across Middle Earth. Of course he was. That's the thing. I never understand why, like, okay, so we've got a tireless master archer with 1,000 years of combat experience, like a 9 foot tall, like warrior king. This dwarf who's like basically untouchable in like combat and like can just turn into like this flurry of axe swings, and it's like, oh, and some hobbits.
But the entire point of the Hobbit was, I mean, Merry and Pippin just kind of come along.
They just turn up, yeah.
Yeah, Frodo is meant to be the person that may be not corruptible. Right,
yeah.
because the hobbits don't seek power and all that, so it's
the thing about hobbits, isn't it? Like that's the whole point of the original Hobbit novel. It's like, Smaug doesn't really see them as a threat because he's and that's why they win. Because like, he doesn't deem the Hobbit to be a threat or something worthy of his notice, and therefore it's able to steal the One Ring from him. But Lucas, like we know what we're getting onto, and it's got to be character. And then powers and abilities. Because I read ahead, and do you know the shit that elves in Tolkien's literature are capable of?
I probably know like a little bit, but I'm guessing that there's way more stuff than I realised.
There's so much dumb stuff that they wisely cut out of the films. It'd be too stupid to try and explain. So, character. Although he lived among them, Legolas was not fully of the Sylvan Elves. The son of the Elven King Thranduil, who had originally come from Doriath. Hey, Ganondorf's forward smash, let's go. Legolas was at least half Sindar. His mum's identity is completely unknown. You think, how is there not something in some part of all that extended universe bullshit where they tell you Legolas's mum is?
Because it's possible, right? In at least when you think in humans where the mother gives birth, like, surely you know who the mum is because they have to give birth.
Yeah, and it's that thing, is it like, with how much Tolkien would write about everything, that like the exhaustive detail he'd go into describing stuff, and we don't know who Legolas's mum is.
Yeah, and I guess it's just maybe because she's inconsequential, so therefore we don't have to know who she is.
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe she's an unimportant character.
But are you aware as well of like how many like silly details are in Tolkien that people have argued about incessantly?
I'm not aware, but I'm also not surprised.
And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because very recently, as of the time of recording, there was a Magic the Gathering Lord of the Rings crossover. And they have reimagined Aragorn as black. And that is like, I can see, people can't see Lucas, but I can just see he's got his head in his hands, like, oh, for fuck's sake.
And because I know what's coming, not because he's black, because I know what you're about to say to clarify.
Yeah. And that has led to a bunch of people being incredibly, vocal about how that's not in line with Tolkien's original vision. And did you know, one, as I mentioned earlier, Tolkien would have hated the movies anyway. Like, he spoke long and at length with friends and family and anyone who listened to him that he did not want anybody to get hands on his universe, and was very, very like explicit in like his derision of popular media and how it was not capable of adapting his work in the first place. But ignoring all that, do you know that like Viggo Mortensen version of Aragorn is not what Tolkien would have envisioned?
Of course it isn't.
Because one, Viggo Mortensen's about 5'10", and in the novels, Aragorn is 6'6". And you might think that's an inconsequential detail to be annoyed about. Tolkien would complain about that, as we're about to discuss. But also, Viggo Mortensen has a beard in that movie. Do you know, he's got like the stubble.
He's got the tuft, yeah.
He's got that manly warrior stubble. Aragorn in the novels could not grow a beard because someone actually sent a letter to Tolkien because they were like trying to draw Aragorn. Like, does he have a beard? It's like, no, because Aragorn is like half elf and as a unique quirk of his elven physiology, cannot grow a beard.
Right.
And you might think that's a really minor thing to get annoyed about. Have you spoken to Tolkien fans? Because are you aware about the argument about whether or not the Balrog has wings?
Oh, God.
So do you think do you remember the Balrog in Peter Jackson's movie? It has like the big flame wings.
You cannot pass!
Yeah. Cool.
It's not supposed to have wings. There are literally tens of thousands of words online dedicated to arguing about whether or not the Balrog is supposed to have wings.
And is this because of something that's in the books, or is this something that people have figured out?
It's just in the books, and like every time there's artwork of a Balrog and it has wings, or what appears to be wings, people argue about whether or not Tolkien intended it to have wings.
Right.
And all that makes me think is, it's no wonder people don't want to engage with the fan base of this universe and just imagine it the way that they think it is.
And that's the thing is, Balrog with or without wings, the important thing is that it fights Gandalf and loses, right? And it's a similar thing to Aragorn. It's like, is the skin colour of Aragorn important in any way? No. And as far as I've seen in all of the extended editions, etc., it never comes into play once that that he's a white dude.
And that's one of the things we've talked about in the past before. And so whenever you bring up stuff like this, you always get that one person who I know is out there who's like, well, could you just write a black character as white? And my answer to that is yes, as long as you can find a black character who the fact that they're black is incidental to their characterization. And it's a sad fact of media that there are very few black characters or Asian characters or what have you that are written for their race to not be a major part of who they are.
Generally speaking, most characters that are people of colour are written purposefully that way because they've had a lack of representation in the past, and therefore it's more important to their roots. Whereas the fact that Marvel characters were all white people for 40 years is just it's inconsequential most of the time.
Yeah, so the example people see is like, could you write Black Panther to be white? It's like, well, no, because Black Panther being black is important to his characterization and how he was written. But ultimately, you have a character of Winston from Ghostbusters, who him being black is completely incidental to his characterization. The fact he is black is never mentioned in the film and is in fact not important to who he is as a character.
All of the Ghostbusters could be white or black. It's just they are random people of New York.
And then you have one of my favourite films, Alien, which was very famously cast without any regard for gender or race. All the characters were just written as characters, and they accepted anyone to audition for any role.
Yeah,
because they were all it was all just their last names.
Because it's just meant to be people on a spaceship. That's what's important, is that they are human beings on a spaceship. Race does not matter to which characters are which.
And they cast it that way. Expanding upon that idea, there are very few characters in fiction who are white who need to be white. And I remember my mind being blown when I was thinking about is there a character out there who needs to be white? And when someone said to me, Batman. Like, what do you mean Batman? It's like, Batman has to be white. It's like, why does Batman have to? It's like, well, because Bruce Wayne, the whole reason he's able to convince people that he's not Batman is because he's a playboy billionaire who's completely detached from all the issues. That wouldn't be believable if he wasn't white.
Same with Tony Stark, probably. It's like these people that have their own singular vision of how to spend their money being a superhero and not helping out world causes.
Because, yeah, that's how they get away with it, isn't it?
Playboys
It's like,
and
oh,
stuff.
why would Bruce Wayne be Batman? You know, he's completely insulated from all of the issues and ills plaguing society. That's only believable if he's white, and that blew my mind. And that's just, hopefully, there's someone out there who's going to be that shitty contrarian reply guy who's at least thought about what they were going to say now and taken some of that on board.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, you could then rewrite Batman a little bit so that Bruce Wayne is not that guy, and that's how you could get around it. But there would be like a little bit of rewriting involved to like make that character believable that they're not, because again,
yeah, you would have to change some fundamental aspect of who Batman was to make him black, but you wouldn't have to do the same thing for, say, I don't know, like Spider-Man, because now he wears a mask. Like his characterization is that he's like, you know, a kid from like Queens who just wants to do his
anybody
best.
can be Spider-Man. That's the literal
Exactly, yeah.
Stan Lee quote.
And it's the same thing like Aragorn, and there's going to be something like, well, in the books he's described like this. It's like, well, he's also described as having no beard and being 6.5 feet tall, and they changed that for the films.
And did it matter?
Well,
no, it didn't.
It's almost like the way that Aragorn looks is not as important as the way that he acts.
Yeah, you couldn't make Gimli 8 foot tall.
Because, yeah, you know, him being, you know, sure, that's like, you know, the historical way dwarves have always been portrayed in Tolkien's literature.
Even though the actor was one of the tallest actors on set,
Yeah, he was
right?
like 6'2" in real life, and it's just they use camera tricks to make him look shorter. And just, yeah, that's one of those things. And hopefully people out there who've, like, you know, encountered this or thinking it in their head, they've maybe thought about it more than not at all. Because that's always, cause I remember seeing that outline. That's a really interesting, like, you know, interpretation of Aragorn. Like, he looks super fucking cool. It's like, you know, it's like really tall, broad-shouldered black dude with a cool sword. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. And everyone's like, well, he's not black in the books. It's like, well, he's not. Like, in the books, he's got grey hair and he's like 9 feet tall.
I also just find it really funny that with those cards, they've got the ring as one of the cards, but
Oh, yeah.
they've also got a special edition print of the One Ring
There's
where
only-
they're doing
there's
just
only one ring, yeah.
copy of the One Ring. I was like, that is super clever.
Yeah, but I've always just found that so frustrating to see as well. Because I was like, oh, I don't like that you're changing this. And he goes, well, why would it be made then? If it's just like, we've already, like, I hate the idea that you're not allowed to change anything about this. Like, so why would we bother making a movie of it? You've got to change some aspect of it to translate it to a different medium anyway. I was always like, you know, say something like, you know, the Lord of the Rings films, they remade those and they recast all the characters. People would complain. It's like, well, you already got the movies that you wanted. Let's maybe, like, I want to see it from someone else's perspective. I want to see how somebody else has interpreted this universe, because that's interesting to me. Like, and as someone who enjoys the universe, surely you'd think they'd want to see more people's interpretation of it, see how it differs from their own, because then they get to experience the universe they spend all of their time living in their mind, from the perspective of somebody else, and maybe get a new insight into how it's perceived or how it works.
Yeah,
And instead it's like, no.
I encountered this quite a lot when RE4 Remake came out, and I was like playing it on stream and stuff and talking about it online. And there was a lot of comments of people saying, you know, I don't like what they did with this remake. It ruins the original. Like, well, it doesn't ruin the original. You still got the original. Go back and
The
play
original
that if you
still
prefer.
exists. You can go play the original. It's there. You can go play it right now. It's probably the most released video game of all time.
They didn't take it away from you.
No,
You've just
that's the
got
thing,
two
no one's-
options now.
It's like no one's taking, like, with the release out, no one's taking away those original novels. You can still go buy those original novels. You can read them. You can imagine Aragorn any way you want. But, you know, bring it back to Legolas, though. You ready for the bullshit?
Hell
Speaking
yeah.
of, like, you know, stuff they wisely cut from the movies, powers and abilities of Legolas Greenleaf. So, as an elf, so these are presumably, like, inherent abilities that all elves had. You had the tip, like, you know, he could walk silently on grass and snow, leaving minimal footprints, which I do know they put in the movie. During the, like, going through all the snow on the mountaintops, you'll see that Legolas is just walking on top like a dickhead.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's one of those things where you always get people, like, do we mention that guy earlier who, like, wants to watch the extended editions? It's one of those moments where they go, oh, do you know? Watch Legolas in this scene, you'll see that you don't leave footprints on the snow.
And that's a clever detail that I'm glad they never mention.
It's like the stone trolls that were from The Hobbit are in the background of one scene.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but we have here, though, his eyes were sharper than that of men. He could see great distances and in the dark.
Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?
The Uruk's turn northeast! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard!
And here's the one that's fucking bullshit, Lucas. He could even sleep while walking. Elves can sleep while walking, which allowed him to travel 45 leagues in less than 4 days.
They do a lot of walking in those, but...
They do, and that's the thing of like, why would you bother bringing Gimli, who explicitly says dwarves are built for travelling like short distances, when you've got a guy who could have walked all the way to Mount Doom while his eyes were closed.
Oh dear.
He could also tame any unruly horse with just a few words without the need for reins or saddles.
That's fair.
So he had that link tech of like the ho 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 ho, and just the horse just listens to it. And that's another thing.
Just
like, well, like,
soothe it immediately.
I think that is in the movie where you see him like you have like Legolas go up to the horse and just go. And it looks so fucking lame. Oh, but I mentioned earlier, like that Tolkien hated pretty much every interpretation of like his work that wasn't his own. So behind the scenes about Legolas, we have here. So the elves in J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium, which is a great word, were often associated as fairy-like beings who grew great in stature. However, when Legolas was visually rendered as pretty, Tolkien was, and I quote, wrathful.
Oh.
So do you like the modern interpretation we have of Legolas, which is like informed by Orlando Bloom, like blonde, like impossibly perfect features, very soft androgynous features. J.R.R. Tolkien's like, no, fuck that, and he said, and I quote, he was as tall as a young tree, lithe, immensely strong, able to swiftly draw a great warbow and shoot down a Nazgul. Endowed with the tremendous vitality of elvish bodies, so hard and resistant to hurt that they only went in light shoes over rock or through snow, the most tireless of the fellowship. And that to me just sounds like Tolkien wanted to fuck Legolas, which is why I said he's the most fuckable of the elves.
I'm very confused by the fact he's meant to be as big as a small tree.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's another thing as well, elves in media, thanks to Tolkien, are generally portrayed as being like, as he says that, lithe and agile, but also like, quite small. They're usually like, when you have the three fantasy races are men, dwarves, and elves, and like, men are in the middle. Like jack of all trades, dwarves are like, squat and short and strong, and elves are, lithe and fast. Mm-hmm. But what what Tolkien did is he took Legolas's stats and put everything to max. Like, no, he's the tallest, and he's the strongest, and he's the fastest, and he can use all the weapons, and he never tires, he's the best. Which is like another thing, like, if he'd watched those modern movies, he'd have fucking hated them. Mm-hmm. But how many people love Orlando Bloom as Legolas, and how many people in their head imagine Legolas just to be Orlando Bloom?
Yeah, when you think of those elves, yeah, you think of Legolas and the other Lord of the Rings, like the sexy elf group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have liked that. He would have probably cast someone else in the role because he wouldn't have made the movie in the first place. But that's just another example of like, not every interpretation is like, in line with the author's original wishes, and sometimes like the interpretation that we get is one that fans agree is like better or more in line with what they pictured in their head. That's just
I do find it funny though that the idea that Tolkien would be seething and Tolkien's son is complaining about it all the time as he gets like millions / maybe billions out of it. It's like, shut the fuck up.
But it's just that thing, isn't it? Of like once you put something out into the world, it no longer belongs to you. Like your interpretation will always carry more weight as the original author and creator, but the way that your fans and people who consume that media choose to interpret it is just as valid as yours, because that's their version. Like the version of Legolas that exists in their head is just as valid as the one that exists inside Tolkien's head, because they're also enjoying his universe.
You're not allowed to take Orlando Bloom Legolas away from us, right?
Exactly. Just don't be a dick. Perfect, that got to 29 minutes, so.